Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the Islamic Shahada channel. In a country celebrated for its secularism, its groundbreaking scientific achievements, and its relentless pursuit of rational inquiry, an unexpected trend has begun to surface. Some of America's most accomplished scholars, scientists, and academics are embracing Islam. At first glance, it seems like a paradox. How could individuals whose lives are shaped by logic, research, and empirical reasoning find meaning in a faith rooted in revelation, spirituality, and submission to God? And yet, this very paradox is precisely what makes their journeys so compelling. The phenomenon of American intellectuals converting to Islam challenges one of the most persistent stereotypes of modern life: the idea that religion and reason are inherently at odds. For these scholars, Islam is not an escape from reason, but rather a framework that makes sense of it. They often describe Islam as a worldview that integrates the rational with the spiritual, the scientific with the moral, the observable with the transcendent. To them, the Quran is not a contradiction to science, but an inspiration for inquiry, a reminder that knowledge itself is an act of worship. The roots of this phenomenon are deeper than mere curiosity. America's academic culture is built on freedom of thought and openness to new ideas. In classrooms and laboratories, questions are encouraged rather than suppressed. Within this atmosphere of inquiry, some intellectuals have encountered Islam not through dogma, but through exploration, reading the Quran, engaging with Muslim colleagues, or studying history. Many found that the faith, often misrepresented in the media, offered a coherence and clarity they had not seen elsewhere. But there is also a wider cultural dimension. America today is experiencing what some call a spiritual crisis. In a world where consumerism dominates, where technology accelerates life to a dizzying pace, and where meaning often feels absent, people, including academics, search for answers that neither wealth nor intellect can fully provide. Islam, with its emphasis on purpose, discipline, and community, presents itself as a powerful alternative. For many, it is not simply a religion, but a way of living that restores balance in a chaotic world. This trend becomes even more striking when viewed against America's political climate. Under the presidency of Donald Trump, Islam has once again been pushed into the spotlight, often in a negative light. His administration's rhetoric on immigration, the so-called Muslim ban, and repeated statements about radical Islam fueled widespread debate about the place of Muslims in American society. Ironically, instead of deterring people from the faith, these controversies seem to have sparked more curiosity. As the media amplified Islam as a subject of fear, others turned toward it as a subject of study. Some scholars, exposed to the noise of politics, decided to look past the headlines and read Islam on its own terms. What they found was not a threat, but a tradition rich in intellectual depth and moral clarity. The influence of prominent Muslim figures in America has also played a role. From academics like Dr. Ingrid Mattson and Umar Faruq Abd-Allah, to activists such as Linda Sarsour and Keith Ellison, Islam has been represented not just as a private faith, but as an intellectual and political presence in the U.S. These figures have engaged in interfaith dialogue, published works that challenge misconceptions, and opened doors for a new generation of Muslims to participate in American life. Their visibility has made it easier for others, especially those in academia, to see Islam as more than just a foreign religion. Numbers, too, tell a story. Studies from research centers such as Pew have consistently shown Islam as one of the fastest growing religions in the United States. While conversions to Islam come from many backgrounds, a significant portion has been among educated professionals. The embrace of Islam by people who are trained in critical thinking and scientific method raises important questions. Are they irrational, or are they recognizing something that many others have overlooked? For them, Islam's harmony between faith and reason is not a contradiction, but a completion. Critics may argue that religion should have no place in the realm of science and academia, yet history tells a different story. Many of the world's greatest scientific achievements, from algebra and astronomy to medicine and philosophy, flourished in Islamic civilizations. Today's American converts often rediscover this connection, realizing that the very foundation of scientific inquiry in the Muslim world was built on the belief that studying creation was a path to understanding the Creator. The phenomenon also reflects a deeper truth about America itself. The U.S. has always been a land where identities evolve and new communities emerge. Just as waves of immigrants brought Catholicism, Judaism, and Buddhism into the American fabric, Islam too is now shaping the nation's intellectual and cultural life. What was once viewed as an immigrant faith has increasingly become an American faith, embraced not only in mosques, but also in universities, laboratories, and libraries. Ultimately, the rise of American academics converting to Islam forces us to rethink the relationship between knowledge and belief. These individuals remind us that science can explain the mechanics of the universe, but not its meaning. Rationality can describe how life works, but not why it exists. In that gap between explanation and purpose, Islam has offered an answer that is at once spiritual and rational, deeply personal, yet universally resonant. As America wrestles with questions of identity, diversity, and faith under Trump's presidency, the quiet but steady conversions of its intellectual elite point to a future where Islam is no longer seen as foreign or incompatible, but as part of the nation's story. This is not just about religion. It is about the reshaping of culture, politics, and the very meaning of truth in the modern age. The story of American academics converting to Islam is more than a curiosity. It is a reflection of a world in transition. It shows that even in an age dominated by science and secularism, faith still has a place. And perhaps, as these intellectuals suggest, it is precisely through faith that reason itself finds its fullest meaning. Dr. Laurence Brown is not the kind of person one would immediately expect to convert to Islam. A distinguished ophthalmologist, educated at some of America's most prestigious institutions, including Cornell University and George Washington University School of Medicine, he built his career around science, reason, and the tangible realities of medical practice. For years, his life was defined by the precision of surgery, the discipline of medical training, and the rational mindset of modern science. Faith, if considered at all, was something distant, a matter for others, not a scientist immersed in the rigors of evidence-based thinking. Yet beneath the surface of professional success, there remained an unspoken question that science could not answer. What is the ultimate purpose of life? Like many educated Americans, Dr. Brown was raised in a cultural environment shaped more by secular values than by deep religious conviction. His outlook was skeptical, analytical, and firmly grounded in the observable. But life has a way of shaking even the most rational foundations, and for Brown, the turning point came with the birth of his daughter. Born with a congenital heart defect, she survived against the odds. For him, this was more than a medical anomaly. It felt like a sign, an opening that invited him to reconsider his assumptions about chance, fate, and divine purpose. This personal crisis became the starting point of a spiritual journey. Brown began to study comparative religion, not as a casual curiosity, but as a rigorous investigation. He read extensively from the Bible, the Torah, Buddhist and Hindu texts, and eventually, the Quran. His method was that of a scientist, critical, evidence-driven, searching for internal consistency and rational coherence. What struck him about the Quran was its clarity, its emphasis on reason, and its direct appeal to human intellect. Unlike other scriptures, which often struck him as layered with contradictions or historical inconsistencies, the Quran spoke in a voice that was both timeless and rational. Dr. Brown has described how, in his readings, he encountered a faith that did not demand the abandonment of reason, but rather called upon it. The Quran repeatedly invites its readers to reflect, to ponder, and to use reason. For someone trained in scientific thinking, this was deeply compelling. Islam was not a blind leap of faith. It was a logical progression from observing the universe to recognizing the necessity of a creator. For Brown, faith became not the rejection of logic, but its natural extension. His intellectual journey eventually culminated in his conversion to Islam, but it did not stop there. As an author, Dr. Brown has sought to document and explain the path that led him from skepticism to belief. His trilogy, The Eighth Scroll, and works such as The First and Final Commandment and Bearing True Witness are widely read among those interested in the intersection of science, reason, and faith. These writings serve not only as personal testimony, but also as a challenge to the assumption that modern, educated professionals cannot find truth in religion. In his books and lectures, Brown often emphasizes that science, while powerful, is limited. It can describe mechanisms, but not meanings. It can map the human genome, but cannot tell us why life exists. For him, the turning point was realizing that questions of morality, purpose, and destiny lie beyond the reach of empirical data. Only revelation, he argues, provides the answers that science cannot. Islam, in his view, offers the most consistent and comprehensive framework for understanding existence. Today, Dr. Brown is not only a respected physician, but also a recognized voice in interfaith dialogue and Islamic scholarship. His journey reflects the broader phenomenon of highly educated professionals in the United States embracing Islam. He represents a bridge between two worlds often seen as incompatible: the world of science and the world of faith. In his case, those worlds did not collide but converged. What makes his story so compelling is not simply that he converted, but how he did so, through study, reflection, and intellectual honesty. He did not abandon his training as a scientist. He used it. He scrutinized texts, questioned assumptions, and tested arguments with the same rigor he applied in the operating room. In the end, he found that Islam withstood scrutiny and offered answers that were not only spiritually satisfying, but intellectually unassailable. Dr. Laurence Brown's story also resonates within a larger American context. At a time when Islam is often misunderstood, his conversion forces a re-evaluation of stereotypes. If a man of science, trained at Cornell, successful in medicine, rational to the core, can find truth in Islam, perhaps the faith deserves a closer look. For Brown, Islam was not the end of inquiry, but the beginning of a deeper one. His journey illustrates a powerful truth, that faith and reason, far from being enemies, can walk hand in hand. Dr. Gerald F. Dirks is a name that challenges assumptions about faith, scholarship, and the human search for truth. Born and raised in a deeply Christian environment in the United States, he pursued theology with remarkable seriousness. He earned his Master of Divinity from the prestigious Harvard Divinity School, a place renowned for producing Christian clergy, theologians, and scholars of religion. After years of study, he was ordained as a minister in the United Methodist Church and served as a pastor. His life seemed destined for a long career in Christian leadership, teaching the gospel and guiding congregations in their spiritual lives. But beneath the surface of his pastoral duties, Dirks carried questions about the historical roots of Christianity, the textual integrity of its scriptures, and the theological puzzles that had troubled him since his early days of study. Harvard had exposed him to the tools of critical scholarship, textual criticism, historical analysis, and comparative study of religion. He was trained not only to accept traditions, but to examine them rigorously, to test their claims against history, language, and logic. This intellectual discipline set him on a path that would eventually transform his faith entirely. As Dirks delved deeper into the history of Christianity, he began to confront issues that many theologians quietly wrestle with. He saw how the doctrine of the Trinity developed centuries after Jesus, shaped more by political councils than by the original teachings of Christ. He noted the absence of the word Trinity in the Bible itself, and the lack of direct claims of divinity from Jesus in the most authentic texts. Furthermore, he observed how biblical manuscripts were altered over centuries, copied by hand, and sometimes changed intentionally to reflect emerging doctrines. These discoveries unsettled him. For a pastor, such questions are not merely academic, they cut to the very core of faith. If Scripture is inconsistent, if doctrine has shifted, then what remains as the foundation of belief? Dirks realized that he could not ignore these questions, and so he began to expand his search beyond Christianity. It was during this period of exploration that he encountered Islam. At first, he approached it as an academic curiosity. As a scholar, he wanted to understand how another Abrahamic faith positioned itself in relation to Judaism and Christianity. But as he read the Quran and studied Islamic theology, something unexpected happened. He found coherence. The Quran, unlike the texts he had examined in Christianity, appeared preserved in its original form, recited and memorized in the same Arabic for over 1,400 years. Its message about God's oneness, pure monotheism, without division, without incarnation, resonated with the earliest teachings of Abraham and the Hebrew prophets. For Dirks, this was striking. Islam seemed not to be an innovation, but a return to the roots of divine revelation, a continuation of the same stream of faith that began with Adam and flowed through Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. He also found in Islam a faith that integrated reason with spirituality. The Quran repeatedly challenged its readers to think, to reflect, and to seek evidence. It did not demand blind submission, but called upon human beings to use their intellect as a path toward recognizing God. For a man trained in rigorous theological inquiry, this was profoundly appealing. Islam spoke to his mind as much as to his heart. Eventually, after years of study and reflection, Dr. Gerald F. Dirks made the life-changing decision to embrace Islam. For many who knew him, this was a shock. How could a Christian pastor, a graduate of Harvard Divinity, leave his pulpit for a religion so often misunderstood in America? But for Dirks, the answer was simple: truth. He had followed the evidence where it led, and it led him to Islam. Following his conversion, Dirks dedicated much of his life to explaining his journey and sharing his insights. He authored several influential books, including The Cross and the Crescent, an interfaith dialogue between Christianity and Islam, Letters to My Elders in Islam, and Abrahamic Faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These works became valuable resources for Muslims and non-Muslims alike, offering not just polemics but reasoned dialogue, historical analysis, and a spirit of genuine inquiry. In his writings and lectures, Dirks often highlighted the similarities among the Abrahamic faiths while also explaining the distinct features that led him to Islam. He emphasized that Islam did not deny Jesus, but restored him to his rightful place as a prophet of God, not as God himself. He showed how Islamic theology preserved the pure monotheism of Abraham, something he felt Christianity had compromised. Dr. Gerald F. Dirks' story resonates strongly in contemporary America. At a time when Islam is often misrepresented as foreign or incompatible with Western values, his life stands as living testimony to the opposite. Here was a man deeply grounded in American Christian tradition, educated at one of the nation's most elite theological schools, and fully engaged in pastoral ministry. Yet he found in Islam not contradiction, but fulfillment. His journey represents the meeting of reason, history, and faith in a way that challenges both Muslims and Christians to rethink their assumptions. For Dirks, the move to Islam was not about rejecting his past, but about completing it. He often spoke of Islam as the final chapter of the Abrahamic tradition, the seal that tied together the revelations that came before. By embracing Islam, he felt he was returning to the original message of the prophets, unclouded by centuries of theological debate and human alteration. Today, his legacy continues to inspire. His books are still read widely in interfaith circles, and his story is cited as one of the most compelling examples of a Christian theologian who crossed the bridge into Islam. For many, he demonstrates that faith does not have to be inherited blindly. It can be chosen after study, after questioning, and after wrestling with doubt. Dr. Gerald F. Dirks reminds us that the search for God is not limited to the heart alone, nor to the mind alone. It is a journey that demands both. And in his case, the destination was Islam, a faith that satisfied his intellect, answered his deepest questions, and gave him a renewed sense of purpose and devotion. Dr. Umar Faruq Abd-Allah, born Weeman Landgraf in 1948 in Columbus, Ohio, represents one of the most influential examples of an American intellectual who embraced Islam and went on to become a leading voice in bridging Western scholarship with Islamic thought. His journey reflects not a break from his academic upbringing, but an extension of it, a widening of horizons that brought together the rigor of modern intellectual inquiry with the depth of classical Islamic theology. Educated at the University of Michigan, Dr. Abdullah completed his PhD in Islamic Studies at the University of Chicago in 1978, focusing on the development of Islamic thought and theology in the early centuries. His academic foundation gave him a unique vantage point. Unlike many who approach Islam solely through faith, his path was marked by the careful study of history, philosophy, and languages. By the time he converted, he was not stepping into the unknown, but entering a faith tradition he had scrutinized, dissected, and appreciated through years of scholarship. What drew him most was Islam's profound balance between intellect and spirituality. In the Quran and in the writings of classical scholars, he found a worldview that did not separate reason from revelation, but instead wove them into a coherent tapestry. He often emphasizes that Islam is not irrational. Rather, it calls upon human beings to use their minds, reflect, and engage critically with the world. For him, conversion was not a leap of blind faith. It was the culmination of reasoned inquiry, and a recognition of the ethical and metaphysical truths that Islam offers. Over the decades, Dr. Abdullah has become a central figure in shaping how Islam is taught, studied, and lived in America. As a teacher and thinker, he has written extensively on Islamic theology, spirituality, and history, but also on issues deeply relevant to American Muslims, identity, pluralism, and the challenges of living in a secular society. His essay, Islam and the Cultural Imperative, is widely cited for its call to Muslims in the West to embrace their local cultures in harmony with Islamic values, showing that Islam is not foreign to America, but can be deeply rooted in its soil. His work also challenges the stereotype that conversion to Islam is primarily emotional or reactive. Instead, his path underscores how Islam can attract the most rigorous intellectual minds, individuals who find in it a framework that satisfies both the heart and the intellect. Dr. Abdullah frequently highlights the historical depth of Islamic civilization, where philosophy, science, literature, and art flourished not in opposition to faith, but because of it. In this sense, his conversion and subsequent scholarship are a reminder that Islam is not only a spiritual refuge, but also an intellectual home. Today, he continues to teach and lecture, inspiring both Muslims and non-Muslims with a vision of Islam that is compassionate, rational, and rooted in knowledge. His journey exemplifies how a faith often misunderstood in the American public sphere can, in fact, serve as a rich intellectual tradition that resonates with scholars who dedicate their lives to the pursuit of truth. Through Dr. Umar Faruq Abd-Allah, we see that Islam in America is not merely the story of immigration or cultural identity, but also the story of knowledge, how a faith tradition can engage the most brilliant minds and lead them toward both spiritual depth and intellectual clarity. Dr. Jeffrey Lang, a professor of mathematics at the University of Kansas, represents one of the most compelling stories of how intellectual rigor and spiritual discovery can intersect in modern America. Born in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1954, Lang grew up in a Catholic household but soon found himself disillusioned with religion. By the age of 18, he had declared himself an atheist, convinced that the God he had been taught to worship did not exist. His reasoning was sharp, analytical, and unapologetically skeptical, a mindset perfectly suited for the discipline of mathematics, which became his lifelong vocation. For Lang, mathematics was not merely a career, but a worldview. The beauty of numbers, the precision of equations, and the certainty of logical proofs provided him with a sense of order and clarity that religion, in his early life, had failed to deliver. His lectures at the University of Kansas reflected this passion. He was known not only for his brilliance, but also for his ability to make complex concepts accessible and inspiring. Yet beneath his academic success lingered an existential unease, the timeless human question of meaning and purpose. The turning point in his journey came not through debate, but through a simple gift. A Muslim colleague handed him a copy of the Quran. Initially, Lang approached the text with the same skepticism he applied to religious scriptures in the past. He expected contradictions, dogmatic assertions, or vague spiritual claims. Instead, he found something profoundly different. The Quran spoke directly, often addressing the reader in the second person, engaging his intellect rather than bypassing it. What struck him most was its structure, the rhythm, the logic, the symmetry of its verses, which resonated with the same elegance he admired in mathematics. For a mathematician accustomed to patterns and proofs, the Quran revealed itself as a text of remarkable coherence. He described his first readings as a dialogue, sometimes challenging, sometimes unsettling, but always compelling. The Quran did not shy away from asking the very questions that haunted him. Why are we here? What is the nature of suffering? What lies beyond this life? Each time he returned to the text, he found not only spiritual guidance, but also intellectual satisfaction. This journey of discovery eventually led him to embrace Islam. For Lang, faith was not an abandonment of reason, but its natural extension. Islam provided him with a framework where the rational and the spiritual were not at odds, but complemented one another. His conversion was not an impulsive emotional leap, but the outcome of years of questioning, dialogue, and study. In 1982, he formally accepted Islam, and his life's path took on a new dimension. Dr. Lang went on to write extensively about his experience, with books such as Struggling to Surrender and Even Angels Ask. These works, deeply personal yet intellectually rich, capture the inner struggles of a modern intellectual coming to terms with faith. His writings address not only his own conversion, but also the challenges faced by Muslims in the West, issues of doubt, identity, and reconciliation between tradition and modernity. Through them, he has reached thousands of readers, offering a voice that resonates with those who grapple with the same tensions between faith and reason. Today, Dr. Jeffrey Lang continues to inspire both students and Muslims across America and beyond. His lectures emphasize that Islam is not a religion that fears inquiry, rather, it invites it. He often highlights how the Quran repeatedly calls upon humanity to reflect, to think, and to use the faculties of reason, qualities that align seamlessly with the mindset of a scientist or mathematician. The story of Jeffrey Lang illustrates a powerful truth, that faith and intellect are not opposites locked in conflict. Instead, they can be partners in the search for meaning. For a man who once believed religion had nothing to offer, the Quran revealed itself as a text of infinite depth and beauty, an intellectual and spiritual universe that continues to inspire his journey and the journeys of countless others. Through his life and work, Dr. Jeffrey Lang stands as living proof that in the modern world, where doubt, skepticism, and rational inquiry dominate, Islam can still captivate not just the heart, but the very mind trained to question everything. Dr. Hamza Yusuf, born Mark Hansen in 1960 in Walla Walla, Washington, and raised in Northern California, is perhaps one of the most influential Muslim scholars in the Western world today. His journey from a questioning youth to a leading voice of Islamic thought illustrates how intellectual pursuit and spiritual longing can converge into a transformative path. Raised in a Christian household, Hansen was surrounded by the cultural currents of the 1960s and 70s, a period marked by social upheaval, philosophical questioning, and the search for alternative ways of life. As a teenager, he immersed himself in literature, philosophy, and comparative religion, hoping to find answers to life's most pressing questions. He read widely, from Plato to modern existentialists, from Christian theology to Buddhist and Hindu writings. Yet the more he explored, the more he felt a gap between intellectual speculation and a truly holistic way of life. A turning point came in his late teens after a near-death experience. Involved in a serious car accident, Hansen confronted his own mortality in a way that abstract philosophy could not answer. This moment of vulnerability sparked a deeper spiritual quest. It was during this search that he encountered Islam, not through superficial exposure, but through serious engagement with its texts and traditions. He began reading the Quran, Islamic philosophy, and the works of classical scholars. What struck him most was the intellectual depth and spiritual coherence of the tradition, its ability to unite reason and revelation, law and spirituality, knowledge and practice. By 1977, Mark Hansen had embraced Islam, taking the name Hamza Yusuf. His conversion was not a rejection of his Western upbringing, but rather a realization that Islam offered a framework where intellect and faith could coexist in harmony. Determined to deepen his understanding, he traveled extensively to study under some of the greatest Muslim scholars of the 20th century. He spent years in the Middle East and North Africa, learning Arabic, Islamic law, theology, and spirituality. His teachers included renowned scholars in Morocco, the United Arab Emirates, and other centers of Islamic learning, grounding him in a classical education rarely pursued by Western converts. Upon returning to the United States, Hamza Yusuf quickly emerged as a powerful voice bridging the gap between Islamic scholarship and Western intellectual life. His lectures and writings revealed a rare ability to communicate complex theological and philosophical ideas in a way that resonated with both Muslims and non-Muslims. He spoke about justice, ethics, spirituality, and the importance of preserving tradition in a modern context. Perhaps his most enduring contribution is the founding of Zaytuna College in Berkeley, California in 2009, alongside Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya and Imam Zaid Shakir. As the first accredited Muslim liberal arts college in the United States, Zaytuna represents Yusuf's vision of reviving classical Islamic education while engaging the challenges of the modern world. It stands as a symbol of how Islam, when taught with intellectual depth and spiritual sincerity, can enrich the broader American educational landscape. Dr. Hamza Yusuf is not without controversy. His willingness to engage with American political leaders, his critiques of extremism, and his emphasis on moderation have sometimes drawn criticism from different sides. Yet this complexity only underscores his role as a public intellectual, navigating the tensions between tradition and modernity, faith and politics, East and West. Today, Hamza Yusuf is widely regarded as one of the most prominent Muslim scholars in the West. His lectures attract audiences worldwide. His writings are studied by both Muslims and academics, and his influence continues to shape the intellectual and spiritual life of American Islam. For many, his story demonstrates that skepticism and intellectual curiosity do not have to lead away from faith. They can instead be the very foundation of a profound spiritual awakening. Hamza Yusuf's journey from Mark Hansen, the searching youth, to one of the leading Muslim thinkers of our time reflects the enduring human quest for truth. It shows that Islam, far from being an inherited tradition alone, can also be a conscious, deliberate choice of some of the brightest minds in America. An embrace of a worldview that satisfies the heart, nourishes the soul, and challenges the intellect all at once. Across fields as diverse as medicine, theology, mathematics, and philosophy, a common thread unites these American scholars: the relentless pursuit of truth. Each of them, whether beginning from skepticism, from the depths of theological study, or from the rigors of scientific inquiry, found themselves arriving at Islam not as a matter of cultural inheritance, but as a conscious, deliberate choice. Their stories challenge the widespread assumption that religion must be blind faith, or that reason must exist in isolation from spirituality. Instead, they show us that Islam, when studied with sincerity and depth, offers a framework that speaks to both the heart and the mind. Dr. Laurence Brown, once a skeptic and surgeon of the eye, found clarity not only in vision, but in worldview. Dr. Jerald Dirks, a former Christian pastor shaped by Harvard divinity, discovered in Islam a continuation of the Abrahamic tradition he had long studied. Dr. Umar Faruq Abd-Allah, the theologian, revealed how Islamic thought can coexist with and enrich Western scholarship. Dr. Jeffrey Lang, the mathematician, saw in the Quran the beauty of symmetry and logic that no human hand could replicate. And Dr. Hamza Yusuf, born Mark Hansen, transformed his philosophical and spiritual curiosity into one of the most influential institutions of Islamic learning in the West. Their individual paths converge on a single truth: Islam is not simply about ritual practice or cultural identity, but about intellectual and spiritual integration. It is a way of life that calls upon human beings to think, to question, and to reflect, while also offering answers to the deepest existential questions. In their journeys, we see that faith and reason are not adversaries. They are complementary forces that illuminate one another. As Dr. Jeffrey Lang so eloquently put it, faith and reason are not enemies. In fact, they illuminate each other. In today's America, a nation often described as secular, modern, and rational, these stories carry profound meaning. They remind us that even in an age dominated by science and technology, the human heart still seeks transcendence, and the human mind still longs for coherence. Islam, for these scholars, became the answer to questions that science alone could not resolve, questions of purpose, morality, destiny, and the meaning of existence itself. Thus, the phenomenon of American intellectuals embracing Islam is not a rejection of reason, but its continuation. It is not a denial of modernity, but a call to balance it with timeless wisdom. And it is not a step away from knowledge, but a step toward a more holistic understanding, where rational inquiry and spiritual insight coexist in harmony. For these men of intellect, Islam was not the end of questioning, but the beginning of true understanding. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope it was useful. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.